already see that our next speaker is with us today. It's Ohse, who's the Regional Sales Director from Genetec Germany, and he'll be talking about privacy protection, privacy by design, strengthening compliance. And so the rules that are applied are the same. So Kai, you have around 30 minutes. And again, for the audience, if you have any questions or if there's anything you want to see discussed in more depth, feel free to use our chat. And if you want to join the conversation online on social media, feel also free to use our hashtag PCO22. And having said that, Kai, it's a pleasure to have you with us today, and the stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Kim, for having me. You hear me well?
Yes, we do.
Okay, and you see the content as well?
And we also see your presentation, and we have your pictures, so everything's set up.
Wonderful, wonderful, on spot. Yeah, as I said, thank you for having me, Kim. It's good to be here, and thank you to the audience for watching this little presentation, where I'm going to share some findings and some best practices. This morning we heard a lot about the requirements, the hassle companies have securing privacy protection. This presentation is more about how could you get along with it? How do you do that? And how you stay flexible, because as we also learned, the law is not quite fixed and the jurisdiction is going to underlie constant change. My name is Kai Ohse. I'm the Regional Sales Director of Genetec. It's a company who is focusing on high secure platforms for physical security. And during the next 15 minutes or 20 minutes, I will predominantly cover two topics. One is what's the issue of privacy protection in the range of physical security? And the second one is, how do I become compliant? What do I need to watch out for? And what do I need to do? And probably in the audience, we have a different set of expertise. We have gentlemen, ladies from the IT. We have ladies and gentlemen from physical security. And that's particularly difficult for all the fractions and stakeholders involved in this kind of processes to make sure that you capture the expertise and knowledge from, so to say, the other side of the table, to make sure that you stay compliant, you don't compromise your company, but also in the IT security and the data proceeding officer know what's going on in the area, which is not directly linked to the IT, but probably part of it. Two statements up front. Privacy protection is an obligation. It's not something which is an option and you can choose. It's an obligation, and that's in almost every country in the world. And secondly, there is no one size fits all recipe. It's more like adaptability to the requirements of the company, as privacy protection is not only law-based, it's also based on corporate governance, it's based on ethics, it's based on codex, and that may differ from country to country. So let me move to physical security. Actually, where is the issue coming from? Physical security, that's about protecting buildings, it's about protecting people, it's about protecting our daily life, it's about protecting premises. And physical security is collecting actually a lot of data. We know the buzzwords of video surveillance, vehicle identification, car license plate reading, intrusion protection, basically capturing data of people coming in, coming out, leaving the office, the whole activity on access control, face recognition, also for criminal and law enforcement. We talk about things like biometric data, which is probably not only personal data, it's also sensitive data, which is even more critical, paragraph 9 of the GDPR. But also, if a crime was committed, like theft in a retail store, you want to make sure that you have proper evidence management. You want to have video analytics to learn from who's going to visit your shop, who's leaving your shop, who's crowding specific places, what dynamic a crowd has, and where potential escalations may happen each time you capture personal data. And that's the point. So when we talk about privacy protection, then predominantly we talk about data protection. And the objectives of the law, of our codex, of corporate governance, is to build a framework that allows us to make privacy protection an embedded part of our systems. And that's probably the whole point. The law calls it personally identifiable information, difficult word, but it's often referred to as personal data or personal information. And there's also the next level, the more strict level, which is sensitive data, that you easily cross a line collecting sensitive data without being aware of. And I may give you one example. If you have a couple entering a store, probably not sensitive data, but if you have two males entering a store and obviously they have a different gender understanding, it already becomes sensitive data. And that is something that requires to deal with those sensitive data in a much more critical, much more strict way than if it would be only personal data. So that's something we all need to be aware of. What is personal data in the physical security environment? Actually, it's almost everything. It's your name. It's your name on the access card, which you present to a door. It's your date of birth. It's your telephone number. It's email, social security number, license plate, and predominantly and first and foremost, it's every image that's been made of you and videos. But it was also important, and it's often neglected, it's data that can become personal data because you can combine it. Like the electricians comes to see your company to fix a problem, was only wearing the company dressing. You have the date because the person entered into the reception. You have the company, and then you have the person, and then again, out of this combination, you draw personal data, and out of this, you have certain requirements. So the first checkpoint for figuring out if this is something that you need to deal with is, do you capture data? Could it be deemed as personal data? And I think the law is very specific on that one. How you store it, how long you're going to store it. And it's not about storing time, it's about storing location. Another example, if you have a retail chain or gas stations, and every video camera stores data and you don't centralize the data and erase it locally, then the manager of this store is already responsible with respect to GDPR or any other country regulation. That also happens if there's some data being transmitted to laptops or any other devices outside of the physical security. Again, you will be held responsible for that. The other question is how you use it. This is the term of appropriateness, and you need to prove that it's appropriate. It's not the authorities who are going to prove to you that's not appropriate or prove to you. It is you who have to approve it. And there were many fines to be imposed recently because video capture was not deemed to be appropriate for the purpose. And then it's a question how you document it, what happens to the data, what's been transferred, and so on. So the first point is clearly, is that something which is of relevance to you? And if so, then and only then you probably need to take a closer look. Oh, I mentioned GDPR, but as you also heard this morning, there's much more to say. A lot of countries have different regulations, different levels, and not only that, it's also a constantly moving target. We heard it out of GDPR, we heard it out of German DSGVO, we heard it from different countries, also in the USA. It's not just one set of regulations. California is much more strict than other states, and you need to be aware that you have this kind of requirements. Where the authorities in the European Union probably take a leading role is imposing fines. It could be up to 2% if this is negligence. It could be up to 4% if this is gross negligence, or if you cross a certain line, and those fines already have been imposed. So the risk is very close that a fine is being imposed. And when you have authorities checking your doing, then it's already too late to fix it before the fine is going to be imposed. So the question though is, where is my data stored? My question is, where do I capture data? If you're a German company, French company, European Union located headquarter company, but you capture video out of the European Union in other regions of this world, then you underlie those regulations in those countries, but you also underlie the GDPR of the European Union because you store and you process personal data. I think the most important point is here a checkpoint for yourself to see what is the system doing with this kind of data? Is it flexible enough to be adaptable to the requirements of the different regions? And is it adaptable to the changes that are going to come? The most recent one was the COVID crisis, where all of a sudden everyone was requested to wear a mask entering a store, and the store owner was requested to prove that a certain level of people entering the store wearing masks, or otherwise in the healthcare space, like pensioners' homes and hospitals, you were to prove that you have been put systems and mechanisms in place not to let people in who are not wearing a mask. So you fulfill one of the obligation, which is an imposed law. And the same token, you probably cross a line because, again, you capture personal data, you identify faces, and you haven't had taken precaution to handle those data in a compliant way. So that's why flexibility is extremely important. And it takes me back to the point I made initially. One size fits all definitely does not solve the problem. All right, let's have a quick look on PIPEDA. PIPEDA is the Canadian regulation. What I like very much with this is not just paragraphs and requirements and commandments. It's much more about a process. And the process elements are probably very similar around the world. And each process element is to be checked and is to be has to be compliant. So I start with the checkpoint first, and then let's have a very quick view on what are the components that you need to screen. And I bet there are components which you probably have not yet on your radar screen. So the checkpoints on those components and those activities is, how do we do that? Do we do this manually? Is this embedded in our system? Can it be fully automated so that we avoid human errors? Can it be enforced by the system? How is it reported, particularly if you withdraw personal data from those systems for whatever reason, forensic reasons or whatever? Again, an example, you have some theft in a store and you have video capture and you look at the person who was committing the crime. But next to this person, there are other people who are not connected to this crime, but again, you see the faces. It's your detective, it's the store manager, it potentially is the police, it might be other people, and that's exactly what's not allowed to be done. So where are we in this respect, and what are our weak spots? That's the key question. And what the Canadian proposal basically is in the process to say, go step by step. Maybe this slide is a little bit difficult to read, so let me just walk quickly through those points. You need to get explicit consent of storing personal data, which is particularly difficult when you do video capturing. So then in that case, you need to inform people, and you also need to be able to shut down the camera visibly if you don't capture data, because where the jurisdiction is particularly critical is, do video capturing need to take place 24 hours, or could it be limited to certain hours where specific crimes are being committed, and outside of those hours, you do not want to have video surveillance because you start surveying employees. And that is something which is, again, critical with respect to privacy, but it's also critical because you might have a contract with the trade unions or the Workers' Council to exactly avoid this kind of employee surveillance. You need to be able to answer privacy questions. Is the system able to do that? If an employee or a visitor of your store is asking, what do you do with the data? How long you keep it? How are you going to erase it? So this is something you can do it manually, or you can enforce it. That, for example, after 72 hours, everything is being erased for good reasons. Also, the way you collect data need to be limited. So you may want to keep some data committing of a person who committed a crime, but you want to erase everything which is around, and you want to make sure it's erased, and this deletion of data is also compliant. Of course, you need to have a clear policy on collection and use, and most companies have that. What they don't have is that this is embedded in the system. So they leave it up to the personnel to comply with the rules the policies that have been defined, but often enough this is simply forgotten. That directly takes you to staff privacy training. Training is the one thing, proper execution is the other thing. And if you have a system who's fully enforcing and automating this kind of procedures, makes your life much easier and gets you to much higher compliance level than if everything would be left up to the individual. You might have breaches, you might have somebody breaking into your database, you might have somebody stealing your data, you might have the event of whistleblowers. So you need to make sure that the system is able to report breaches. If those breaches could not be prevented, but breach prevention even is the bigger point here. And of course, that basically means you need to limit the access to data in many, many different ways. So it's not like, you know, one person, the person who has access to data can see everything. It's not like that. It has to have different levels, even up to authorities. In case you have a criminal investigation, the police or the lawyers or the state attorney may have a look at those kind of evidences, but not the store manager. So that's also something a system should be able, as otherwise you're running the risk looking at data which you are not deemed to look at. Encryption, privacy protection, all the cybersecurity elements are extremely important because it's part of your network, and own one single device who is not compliant may risk the entire company to lose the 27001 certificate. So the whole company, the IT, runs a risk of not being compliant if one single device is not compliant. And unfortunately, we have this kind of situation very often with cameras which are outdated, cameras which has been proven to be vulnerable, or cameras that simply run with a very outdated firmware because nobody thought about and remembered that also cameras are IT devices that need to be updated regularly. Having said this, let me get into how we're going to solve this kind of problem. And I would like to give you a few examples how compliance can be embedded into a system by design. The first and foremost is you want to make absolutely sure who has access to your data and who has access to what kind of data. You may authorize people, you may authorize groups, but you also authorize IT devices, servers, workstations, websites, applications, because this data is not just for looking at who's going to enter my building or my store, or who's walking across a public place, or who is being in public transport. There are other systems connected to it, particularly when it comes to access control, access cards. You're a guest to a company, you received a QR code, the QR code is being registered, and with it all your personal data. So who has access to this data? That's authorization. But also authentication is very important. Is Mr. Miller, who is going to pretend to be Mr. Miller, is this really Mr. Miller? And there is quite some state-of-the-art technology available to make sure that those people who pretend they are exactly those people, to really check it out, and avoiding breaches and avoiding fraud. So when you're going to select a video or access control management system, or a system who's going to manage license plate recognition on your parking space, make sure that you select a solution that really has the highest possible level of cybersecurity and authentication. So the question for your company, for your teams, for yourself is, where are we today? Do we have this level of embedded security yet? Or if not, how do we do that? Are we still fine, or do we need to do something? Do we need to enhance our technology to make sure that nobody can access the data who is not authorized and fully authenticated to access this data? Personal data identity management is the same thing. You collect a lot of data, particularly from your employees and from your guests coming to see you, coming to meet you. And this is the basics. Is it encrypted? Is it centralized? Is all this required to open a door? Or if not, what kind of data probably should not be requested? If you ask for more data than actually is required for the purpose, then again, you run the issue that you're not being appropriate. If you're not being appropriate, then video surveillance, for example, could be deemed to be illegal. And that already is a criminal act. It's not like negligence, it's a criminal act if you video capture images of people, or if you collect data which is way too much for the purpose those data have been collected. So identity is kind of the new perimeter. Everybody crossing the line need to be fully identified, but you need to make sure that you have those kind of systems in place. And the more you have automated, the more flexible you are, the better you can deal with different kind of guests coming to see you, different kind of people crossing certain lines, staying in certain places, or whatever is the purpose of the video surveillance or the access control. So the key question is, do you have such procedures in place? Can you sufficiently differentiate between different groups of people? And the example I'm taking here is a nuclear power plant. You do not only have guests coming to a nuclear power plant, you have different areas, different defense lines. And the closer you get to the reactor, the less people are allowed to go in there and stay there. And you also need to document this. So is the system flexible enough to deal with this kind of differences and different requirements because you want to stay appropriate? One of the biggest areas that's neglected is video anonymization. And it's basically blurring the face of the person you capture. And let's assume you have a situation where you have a suspect on an airport. You look for a specific person, could also be child is lost. And then it's not just officers running around trying to find the child, it's the system who's going to look for a face. What you want to make sure is that the other faces are blurred. And the data which are being stored are also blurred. And if unblurring need to take place because of criminal acts or terrorist suspects or whatever, you need to have a court decision to unblur the data. So is my system capable of doing this? And this is called dynamic privacy protection. And very few systems have this kind of capabilities. So anytime you capture a face that can be detected, you need to blur, as otherwise you run far beyond appropriateness, and that puts you in a very critical position. So the question is, do you have this technology in place when you capture data, but also if you combine data, and also if it is about detecting vehicles or detecting people by the way they're wearing clothes, like uniforms or so. So capturing video data blurring is an absolute must-have. And this is not also on the capturing side, but it's also on the storage side, a very important point to watch out for. Video surveillance often is done to protect building, to prevent crime or any assault or any intrusion, but sometimes it happens. And then you need evidence. And this evidence, first of all, need to be waterproof and court-proof. On the other hand, you want to make sure that the way you look and trying to find the evidence, you don't compromise privacy of people who accidentally were involved in this kind of event. So example, in the public transport, person laying on the floor because somebody is doing something bad to another person, but there are other people around. And those other people around, you do not want to be able to identify them or to recognize and store their identity, which particularly is the face, but could be also other indicators. So what you need to make sure is that even if you do this kind of forensic search, you need to make sure that privacy is fully protected. And there are systems in the market who can do that. This is called video reduction. That basically means everything stays blurred except the person you're looking for, or the vehicle you're looking for, or the suspect you're looking for. And that's very important because that makes forensic search much easier. As otherwise, if you run forensic search and you don't have respective court decision, then again, you stay outside GDPR because you violate privacy protection. So question is, are you in a requirement of forensic search? Do you capture video data? Do you store video data? Do you process video data? And if so, do you have this kind of technology in place? Overall, privacy protection is to be embedded in a platform. Think about the different areas of physical security. You have access control, you have intrusion prevention, you have video surveillance, you have car license plate recognition, you have parking space management, you have fire alarm systems, and so on. It is very cumbersome and almost impossible to make sure that you are compliant on all those different areas. And if you have a system, let's say video surveillance of an airport, one of the largest airports in Germany, they have about 17,000 cameras. You simply cannot make sure that you are compliant on each individual device. So what you do is you introduce a security platform. You embed all the policies on the security platform, and you let the platform manage your devices, but not only the devices, but also the processes, called standard operation procedure. And if you enforce authentication or you avoid an employee or security officer switching off the firewall, for example, then this will be applicable for all the devices connected to it, be it a camera, be it a sensor, be it any detection device you might have. And that's the way it could be implemented and it could be managed. And if there's a change, like the COVID crisis or like any other requirement, because the law has changed and all of a sudden the European Union decides, the European Supreme Court decides that 72 hours storage is too much, it should only be 24 hours, you need to make sure you can switch it immediately and then being applicable for all devices connected to it. That's the key important point I want to mention here. The platform is really required because it's not just managing your devices, including release management, firmware management, connectivity checking, and recording any breach or any anomaly which you might have on each single device. It is also embedding processes that the system enforces for every stakeholder who's involved and who's working with the system. Classic example is evacuation. Another airport a couple of years ago, there was a fire. And there's some policy, there's some plan what to do in an evacuation, and you take out the binder from the board and you start looking, what are the different steps, what do I need to do, what is the alarm chain, and so on. If the system would automate it, all those kind of steps, and would really enforce the security officer to go through this kind of steps by staying compliant, then makes your life much easier, saves a lot of money actually, but basically avoids you being non-compliant in any area. Having said this, privacy protection is not just the responsibility of the processor. Privacy protection is a joint responsibility. Of course, the operator, the processor need to be compliant, there's no doubt about, but you have stakeholders involved, which is planners, which is installers, and they must be compliant aware. It's not any longer about technology, functionality of certain systems, of certain cameras, of certain access control systems. It's about being aware of the compliance of the specific area you've been working in. If you have an access control system in Germany, you have other requirements as if you would have an access control system for your premises in China, Russia, or Brazil, or whatever we heard today. So there are really differences, and you need to make sure that you work with those kind of stakeholders and consultants that really are knowledgeable and experienced enough. And also, when selecting vendors, you need to make sure that the technology is really compliance enabling. Unfortunately, still today, you have many vendors who sell technology, but basically say compliance is not our responsibility. It's the responsibility of the one who's operating it. And you have installers who still work under the notion of install and walk away, and that absolutely does not help. We talk about complex IT systems. This is living targets, as I mentioned earlier. And so basically you need to constantly make sure that you stay in line with changing requirements, but you also stay in line with changing and improving technological options to make sure that you are compliant, you stay compliant, and you have the flexibility without paying always a lot of money to make sure that the system is going to be adjusted. So who helps me best? One of the key questions. Check it out, because again, that makes your life a lot easier. The recommendation I would have, final slide, you already made it through. First of all, technology is available, that's for sure. Expertise and experience is available in the market, not just in Germany, but almost in every country. You just need to make sure you work together with them. And then probably the first thing you do is to perform a quick inventory, identify areas of risk, of non-compliance, check fitness of your current solution, of your current vendors you have selected, of installers that are working together with you, set priorities, and immediately fix the first critical issues just to avoid fines and become at least compliant, even if it's additional manual effort. And then you may look into redesigning your physical security system. And it's probably 3 areas to look out for. Be very vigilant if you have non-certified vendors, and there are certifications, but there are vendors who do not have the certifications, and also good reasons for. Be very vigilant with solutions that have a low cyber crime protection, and avoid patchwork of solutions, because sooner or later you're going to lose oversight. Unify physical security into one central system, and get all the building blocks of your security system underneath. Make sure IT is part of it, and make sure that your DPO is part of it, because that really helps you to become compliant and to stay compliant. And if you want to select a flexible platform that avoids you picking up big cost, and it helps you to stay or to protect your former investment. And very important, implement as much as you can standard operating procedures, system-based, so that the system really avoids human error. Checkpoint for you, after all, is it the right time to double check what I'm doing and what we have? Where are my weak spots, and how do we get away from them? That basically was it from my side. On the point, 1 minute left for questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kai. Yeah, indeed, that was almost on point. We still have a minute left for questions if there are some. This isn't the case, so thanks again for joining us, and for everyone on this stage. We are closing this stage, but we have 3 more stages running, so feel free to also jump into our other 3 stages, and we will go back and meet at our main stage back at 5 p.m. So it was great having you here. Thanks again, Kai, and have a lovely evening, everyone.
And thank you, Kim, for having me. And have a good day. Bye for now.